publicly, it's almost everywhere, more or less. To be able to apply those solutions, we need to have global frameworks, global thinking, and local application. So we also need to make sure that people know what it's about and how to use it. Next one, please. There's many different applications. And just to open your mind a little bit, beyond the device you may have on your arm, or maybe you even consider your telephone as being part of it because it's GPS enabled and it does all kind of things for you. It ranges from industrial applications of Internet of Things to consumer applications, from emergency warning system like the tsunami buoy you see up there, to traffic management systems to have better traffic flows or find parking spots in cities, from health monitoring systems to systems that enhance agricultural applications, for instance, better crops and that kind of stuff. Wildlife tracking to security enhancing, and also more and more autonomous systems that are enabled by IoT networks that both observe and act, to tools that enhance our human ability, ranging from helping us to remind things to measure things, and much more. So it's about a global approach. Next one, please. IT for us is part of the internet. It's a specific aspect of the internet, just like social media, communication, and access to information. And how to precisely define it, we don't want to spend too much time on. It's things, it's technology attached to the internet that helps us share data and do things. Next one, please. The Dynamic Coalition is set up actually already in 2008 by a group of people, including Wolfgang Kleinwachter, who can't be here because he had a little mishap happening to him, but he continues to inspire us with his thinking as well. Another person that was mentioned by Eric Loop, I appreciated it very much in the panel yesterday on stage. Joe Aladev was a major contributor to this work. The aim is to develop the shared understanding on global good practice with regards to the Internet of Things, and to do this from a multi-stakeholder perspective. Next one, please. If you've read our paper, you must have seen the principle, and the principle is really to take ethical considerations into account from the outset. And ethical as such means different things at different places, but it's about taking your responsibility to be able to find sustainable ways ahead and to create something that we would see as free, secure, and enabling rights-based. Again, the future we want, which doesn't mean my future for everybody, but within that context. Next one. So in summary, we're thinking of embracing IoT to address societal challenge in an ethical way, to create an IoT environment that also encourages investments. As was remarked this morning by a representative of Microsoft, if it's not economically sustainable, it won't happen. Yes, and that's very important aspect. That is also important, that is also multi-stakeholder. Next to it also needing to be socially sustainable, etc. Emergence of, and the challenge we stand for is ensuring the emergence of a trusted IoT environment, an environment that we feel comfortable with rather than uncomfortable, which would make the cost socially maybe even bigger than the benefits. So that would require, in our thinking, current thinking, as you have seen in the paper, meaningful transparency. So not just a lot of data, but meaningful. A clear accountability, so not just it's all of us, but also, and in this, my responsibility is this, and real choice. So it's not you're in or out, there must be other things possible too. Next one, please. So focus of today's session, please show us. If you push again, please. Securing IoT, is very much one of the big challenges today. If we don't secure it, we can agree on anything, but it won't happen. To address societal challenges in all parts of the world, how do we roll this out in a way that it's not only the well-developed countries that can benefit from it, but also in other ways, other parts of the world, as it can add a lot for relatively little investment in large parts of the world, ranging from warning against emergencies to helping with crops. And the last one is, would it be possible to get in some way to get access to independent, trusted expertise to ensure accountability? Trusted both by those people who are affected by the use of tools, as by those people who develop the tools and may need to have somebody look into their source code or whatever. So with that, very happy on the next slide to introduce the committed contributors, because we all participants in this. By being in this room, you've now become part of the dynamic coalition. That was easy. So easy it can be, Brian. I even know your name. Alex Wong is here from the World Economic Forum. As you know, the World Economic Forum represents a lot of industry thinking, but is also having this clear interest and the full understanding that it needs to go beyond industry alone. So Alex will expand on that. Also very happy to have with us Daniela Brunstrup from the German Federal Ministry of Economy and Energy. She's also been involved in the preparations of the G7, and some of you may have noticed the Torino Declaration coming out in June, I think, this summer. To have a clear vision on that, what we do here with technology needs to serve our society. And you'll tell more about that. Sebastian Belligamba from Montevideo, the Casa de Internet, is also from ISOC. ISOC has done a lot of work on, so what is the impact here and what do we need to discuss on this? And he will expand on their work. Marco Hogewoning has been one of the people on my right who has been helping to set up a group with a more technical focus in RIPE NCC. RIPE NCC is one of the regional internet registries in the world. Those are the ones who take care of the numbers that we need to make things work. And he'll tell more about that. Very happy to have Eric. He needs no introduction. Everybody saw him yesterday in the room. Very happy to have you, Eric, as an AT&T person, maybe slightly more of a telecom perspective than ICT. But look forward to your comments. Arthur van der Wees, here to the right of Daniela, is a lawyer, Dutch as well, but he's also very much involved in the work of the Alliance for IoT Innovation in Europe and in European developments that need to have a legal framework as well. And as a lawyer, he knows everything about it. After short introductions, Avri, Doria on the far right will be the ones who make sure that you get fully engaged if you weren't so already at this point or after the contributions. So with that, please go to the next slide for Alex.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm pleased to be here as well. Thank you, Martin, for giving us the chance. So we're here to actually unveil a new offering that the forum wants to introduce. It's tied to the fourth industrial revolution, which many of you know the World Economic Forum has made a lot of noise recently about the fact that with the new and fast-changing introduction of new technologies and the combination with biology and all sorts of other technologies, that we're really entering a new phase of development. And associated to that, which is music to everyone's ears here and why we're all here at IGF, is that we know there are huge governance gaps and policy challenges that are emerging because of the speed of change. And so within the forum, we felt drawing on our convening power, our neutrality, what we do best in terms of at the leader level, how can we apply this in a more democratic, open process that applies to the way the internet or the digital economy has evolved. So the first slide that you see behind me is all very basic, and all of you, I'm sure, will subscribe to this, that we need to move away from vertical and industry government dominated coalitions to much more of the multi-stakeholder approach. I mean, this is how the internet has developed through the physical layer and the logical layer. Our proposal is that we have to extend this now to the societal economic layer. So these issues of security, privacy, all the societal issues that we're seeing, similarly, we feel need to be addressed in a multi-stakeholder, transparent, open fashion. Our proposed solution to that, if we go to the next slide, it's a term that we're still toying with, whether this will be the final name or not, digital protocol networks. I'm going to come to IoT in a moment, but just as a bit of background, conceptually, we at the forum have the privilege to work with many of you, many at the top level of organizations, many global experts, decision makers. And so how can we turn that into a network of experts who collectively can gather together, mixed based from private sector, public sector, academia, civil society, to come together around a specific issue and follow a very disciplined process to create actionable solutions. And we're using the word protocols because that invokes a bit of a reaction. I know for many of you in this room, or actually for people in this room, protocols probably means 5 different things automatically. What it's meant to say, it's not just another best practice or a case study. It's meant to be concrete, discrete enough actionable solutions that people that were part of the network and people who contributed to the network can implement them. And so they're much more to the far right hand of the spectrum of if you have best practices on one end and laws on the other end, it's on that side of the spectrum. But it is not normative. It's not a law. That's not the role of the forum or many of us in this room. But it's a place to create enough detail that we can then let actors move these forward. So we're calling these digital protocol networks, and it's trying to combine 2 things. First, it's the convening power of the forum working at the leader level, which for some of us is both a pro and a con, but it's also combining with what is actually essential for this to have any validity, which is to be transparent and have the opportunity to get comments and interaction from everyone. And actually, we thought we're a better place to talk about this or present this than the IGF. And special appreciation again to Martin for allowing the space in the DC to present this, and Lynn Santamora, who's been very supportive of us using this space to do this. So let me now turn to the protocols, the last slide on industrial IoT and safety. What we thought we would do is let's just get down to a couple pilots and see how this works. And so the pilot network that is almost near its completion of drafting the first set of protocols is around the topic of industrial IoT, safety, and security. So that's the pertinence to this group here. And the network of experts, and there's a little brochure at the front of the room that you're welcome to take. It's also on the session description as a hyperlink, and it's also on the email list server. So all these documents you can look at. The experts of this network are chaired by the UN, the Counterterrorism Executive Directorate, and Philips. And then the menu of experts in there has everyone from the UL Underwriters Laboratory to IEEE to insurance companies. And what this group decided to do was how can we create actionable solutions so that we can insure industrial IoT devices. In other words, make these insurable. That was the decision of the network. Among all the different things they could do, they decided that they wanted to focus on that particular solution. And therefore, what are the actionable solutions that are needed to allow that to happen? So we've basically been going through a process that began in March of this year. Our most recent gathering was in New York on Wednesday last week, which Martin was able to join, where we're trying to socialize what the group is coming up with and get feedback on could these be the actionable solutions to make IIoT devices insurable. So the other document that's at the front of the room and also downloadable on the link is the actual draft protocol. It's still a draft. It basically mentions that there's 3 areas of focus. The IIoT device safeguards itself, things like hardware integrity, software, et cetera. Secondly, the organization's internal governance risk management processes. And thirdly, data record-keeping metrics. So I'll let you read it on your own. I'm not going to go through it. But what it's meant to be is a framework more than a framework, actionable solutions that we can then take forward. And if we have the right people sitting around the table involved with this, who have the power to implement the solution because they are manufacturers of IoT devices or buyers of IoT solutions, then we're starting to create a movement bottom up that could then potentially then be the way that we address a governance gap.
Thank you very much. Very enthusiastic about it. Interaction now and also after the meeting, of course. Danielle, may I ask you to bring in your perspective from a government?
Yeah. Many thanks, Martin, and also for that inspiring intro. Maybe for introduction, I would like to interlink a little bit the two issues. So the headline of our session today on IoT and artificial intelligence, what indeed the G7 dealt with in Torino in September. Of course, the two things are not the same, but they are very much interlinked. People listening to talks about AI often thinks of super intelligent machines. Some people even have fears and reservations about it. But in fact, what we see as AI is part of our daily life in a lot of machines, because it's a sort of a learning system. And I think it's important, therefore, to bring the two perspectives of Internet of Things and artificial intelligence together. And this is especially true for security and interoperability issues, because those especially depend on standards. And you mentioned that in your introduction, that standards are quite important, and that what we think as well. And allow me to also point to the G20 declaration of April this year, where the G20 also pointed to the fact that standards should play an important role in our digital world. We have various standards developing organizations, the SDOs. We have various fora and consortia, and we believe that it's important that they work very closely together and that we come to more harmonized approaches. Therefore, thank you for the very concrete approaches you are both doing already. With regard to the various worldwide ongoing processes, we think that communication is essential, and therefore the IGF, of course, is a very important forum. Now coming to AI and what we decided as G7 in Torino in September. I would like to point to two aspects of the declaration. The first one is that the G7 share the view that we should focus on an human-centric AI approach, because that is the one we believe is crucial to drive innovation and growth. And the second point is that stakeholders should play the key role in this process. And if you have seen the declaration, there is also an Annex 2 to that declaration, which deals especially with the questions of AI. And yes, that was hard work in Torino, but finally we agreed on something that is maybe more concrete than you usually expect G7 declarations, because we decided on a multi-stakeholder discussion approach that should deal with questions like jobs, and the question what AI means for jobs and jobs creation and productivity, innovation, accountability and transparency. And I very much liked the sentence in the paper saying that transparency also means usability. Yes, indeed, I think that's really crucial. We agreed also on dealing with privacy, cybersecurity, and safety. So we have a real agenda. And I thank very much our Italian and Japanese colleagues who very much pushed the issues, and also the Canadian colleagues, because Canada is now taking over the G7 presidency and has already announced to follow up on this process. But it's of course not only the G7. That's why we think that the IGF is the ideal forum to discuss all these issues, and therefore I'm also happy to say that Germany has applied for the IGF as a host country in 2019, and in case we will become the host country, then I will invite all of you, and I'm happy to meet you then in Berlin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So good to know we have somewhere to go in 2019. We're still looking forward to hear 2018. Thank you for that, very clear. Sebastian, working for a global organization yourself.
Yeah.
What do you think and what are you doing?
Okay. It's a big question. Yeah, it's a very open question. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. As you may know, the Internet Society works to connect everyone, everywhere, to the Internet. And we do so because we believe in the transformational power of the Internet, and the Internet will make our lives better. Not just for deploying technology per se, but because of the consequences of deploying this technology. In that sense, our analysis is that there is good things happening around the Internet and not that good things happening around the Internet. And we have to work on both things, on both fronts. Good things, I mean, the 50% of the human population is connected already to the Internet. That is good. No other technology has been deployed so fast in the history of humankind, but we're still lacking the other 50%, and it's important. And the 50% that is already connected is kind of suffering a way of trust crisis, I would say. I mean, it's lacking the trust they used to have on the Internet. So we have to address both things. I mean, how we manage to connect the 50% of the population that is not connected, and how can we reclaim the trust that people used to have in the Internet as before. One of the things that we see as key to this trust issue, as you put it in the title of this panel, is the Internet of Things and the security-related issues to the Internet of Things. Internet of Things will obviously bring a lot of benefits to everyone in the industrial sector, from the user perspective. There's going to be a lot of things, but there's a lot of challenges coming from the IoT sector regarding to security, and we would like to address that. Next year, as part of our work, we're going to focus on 4 campaigns, we call it. I mean, one of the campaigns is related exactly to IoT and security, and it's going to be launched in January the 1st. And that is in conjunction with something that happened during this year, which is that we are also working now with the Online Trust Alliance. The Online Trust Alliance, you can see their website is otalliance.org. Is now an initiative of the Internet Society. It used to be an independent body. Now it's an initiative of the Internet Society, and something that I would like to refer to you briefly about the OTA is the IoT Trust Framework. I mean, I think it's a very, very good document that highlights a set of 40 strategic principles necessary to ensure IoT in its whole life cycle. I mean, from designing to deployment and use. And I think it's something that is very reliable. We don't have time to go through the 40 principles here, I guess, but I invite you all to go online and visit the otalliance.org website. If you go through that, and it's not in that document because those are the principles, but you will see some recommendations that come out of these principles. And I would like just also to give the title, because in interest of time, we have 28 minutes left for this panel. But when it comes to public policy and governments, I would say there's a couple of recommendations that we can put on the table for use if you choose to. One thing has to do a lot with accountability in the IoT framework. I mean, we believe that accountability should be strengthened in the IoT framework. We have to work clearly on responsibilities and consequences of security issues regarding to IoT. We have to be very clear on how safe our device, our IoT device is from design. I mean, because we strongly believe that we have to work on security by design in IoT. I mean, it's not something that you can implement afterwards, but it's something that you have to implement from the very beginning of the design of the device. Some things that correlates to this is that you have to adapt the user perspective. Security in IoT from the user perspective is very opaque. The typical user of IoT devices is not the typical user of big servers, computer servers, that is knowledgeable on information systems. We're talking about people that are not used to that. I mean, are not used to patch things. I mean, to apply patches in order to erase security holes. I mean, we're talking people here that want just this dishwasher to be connected to the internet for whatever reason I cannot imagine, but they want to do so. So this perspective should be applied from that perspective, that the user is not the typical user of information systems that we use. And the designer of these systems is not the same either. So far, the things that we connected to the internet, computers, servers, etc., were designed by systems engineers that knew about systems and had a very big component of security in their minds when they designed the systems. Today we're talking about appliances makers who, I mean, their field of expertise is not neither the systems and not the security. So we have to be very clear in the framework that we apply before that IoT chip is connected to the dishwasher in order to make it secure. There is a big role for governments there. The government should encourage a culture of security among IoT stakeholders, and I agree totally with you. I'm finishing. That every single stakeholder has to be involved. There is a matter of incentives. I mean, there should be punishment and incentives in order to apply this, and many other things. And you are going to kill me, Martin. So I see your eyes. So I'm gonna wrap up now. But there's many things online. I mean, we have plenty of information online in the internetsociety.org website. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And indeed, this is also why we connected those links in the agenda. You'll find the Torino Declaration. You will find the pages from Sebastian also on the ISOC work page and from the World Economic Forum as well. Marco?
Yes, Martin. Thank you, Arthur. I think in your introduction you used a crucial word, and to me that was the word applications. You referred to the IoT as applications. In that sense, we have a wide variety of things to connect to the internet. Where I come from, my community, we are the regional internet registry. We supply you with IP addresses. That's part of what we do, but that's what we're most famous for. And to keep it very basic, if you want to connect something to the internet, you need to speak the internet protocol. If you want to speak the internet protocol, you need one of my addresses. There's no way to work around me or any of my 4 other RER colleagues in that sense. But taking it from that perspective, and talking to my community, what I often get is sort of why is the IoT so different? You're just connecting something to the internet, something that we've been doing for the last 30 years. And that becomes a bit of a challenge when addressing some of these applications, some of these things. It's in essence, it's just a computer. You pointed to dishwashers. Yes, your washing machine these days might not be a washing machine. It's a computer that washes your clothes. Now, it's a subtle difference, but from our community, it's just like, yeah, it's another computer. It's a computer, it's a phone, it's a washing machine. You need an address, you connect to it. Taking it completely to the other side, where we stand now, and then sort of looking at it from an IoT perspective, we kind of focus on that application, and we kind of often forget to see what goes on behind the scenes. It's kind of common to, oh yeah, your computer, it needs a firewall. Your computer, it needs a virus scanner. And then as previous speakers pointed out, it might be harder to do with appliances. But in essence, yes, when you take that level of security to the transport layer, There's no difference there again. But the big problem, the big challenge I see is that from where we stand now, we get so focused on the application layer that we often forget what goes on behind the scenes. And the transport layer, when I talk to IoT people and explain who I am, because that's usually what I need to do. I need to explain who I am. Oh, you're building Internet of Things. Oh, you're connecting everything to the internet. And they go like, who are you? A regional internet registry? Never heard of it. What's an IP address? Tell me. And that's kind of weird in the sense that, okay, so you try to shape policy on the internet and then talk about internet security. You never ever heard of us?
That's why we invited you on this table, Mark.
Yes. So now you know who I am, and hopefully you know what we do. And so yeah, and that's crucial point in that discussion is like, okay, you're trying to set policy, but at the moment it comes to transport layer, the moment it comes to getting packets from A to B, what I notice from IoT is often it becomes somebody else's problems, and maybe Eric Loeb can later on explain because it's usually his problem. Getting the packets from A to B, that's the ISP, that's something else. But then at the same time, they expect the ISP to do all kind of magic, because after all, they're the internet, and they're there to secure devices. Trying to bridge that gap, what I've been doing over the last year is in a dialogue with my community, which started with, tell me why the IoT is so different and why we should pay so much attention to it, explaining that there is this other world. We've set up a working group now to kind of try to bridge the gap, bring it together. And that's sort of also what brings me here to the table, to the DC, is we need to figure out a way to connect it. We're talking a lot about sort of connecting things, linkages and everything, but we kind of start seeing the IoT as sort of this big monolithic block. And we should also be respectful to the different internet layers and the different function of these layers and the different organizations that manage these layers and work together. And I see Martin speeding up, so I'm gonna wrap it up here with exactly that. Be aware to use the right tool for the right job. I said that yesterday in a workshop, and I'm going to say it again. And reach out to those communities that can effectively manage the layers you need something to do. And don't stop treating the IoT as this big, massive thing, because I don't think that's a feasible solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's just again to show that it's not only stakeholders involved in experiencing it, but also different stakeholders and different steps of the chain that need to work together. Hence, also very important to take the networking and other technology aspects into account. Eric, thanks for being patient. What is your observation at this point, knowing that this is the first time we have you here in the room?
Yeah.
What do you think, and what's next?
Great, thanks, Martin. No, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's terrific to see the work that the Dynamic Coalition has been doing to develop this document over the years. And so I'll be brief with a couple of comments, and it's based on what I've seen over the last decade with the change from just a handful of connected devices, emerging devices, to now it is essentially every customer, every company that we work with has or is looking for their strategy to figure out both the data analytics and the connectivity and how they're getting at things. So I actually approach this from the standpoint of reading the document as it is and trying to think of a couple of items that jumped out at me as meriting some refinement. And the first thing draws directly from what Alex highlighted, and that's the industrial Internet of Things, which isn't mentioned in here. And it needs to explicitly be so, because the industrial IoT, and whether you call it the individual IoT, are considerably different from the standpoint of the data privacy or the security considerations. Just from one of the things that I observe, on the industrial IoT side, we see sometimes the most pervasive and most effective use of IoT is not involving any personal information at all. It may be a shipping line that is tracking cargo containers or doing very minute, careful calculations of how to navigate most efficiently with the least use of fuel to get to the port exactly on time without waiting, away from the port. These small improvements may lead to very significant efficiencies or savings. So it's one, but there are countless examples of that. So my first point would be, in the refinements of this paper and the taxonomy, there needs to be a distinction in how we think about the Internet of Things interacting with humans or human actors and the industrial Internet of Things. That's one fundamental thing. The other thing that did jump out was the benefit of highlighting the need for some cross-jurisdictional and cross-sectoral coherence in frameworks. So I'll talk cross-sectoral. Even within one country, you may have 15 different agencies that have an interest in the IoT depending on the industry sector involved. And if you don't have some kind of national framework or national concept that ensures a degree of consistency or something, then you could have vastly different requirements done at a sectoral layer. And so trying to minimize that is important. And then I would say cross-jurisdictionally, in many areas of the IGF, we've been talking about cross-border data flows. I just bring it up here. It's not in the document, but when I look at many of the IoT deployments, and this is whether it is industrial or whether it's personal, just because of the technology and economic efficiencies, many of these things are created and then deployed on a cross-jurisdictional basis. And the systems that are set up to ensure that they operate, and in fact you can do the relevant data analytics that they're there for. A company can't do this in 226 different ways. And so trying to have some concept in here of cross-jurisdictional coherence, whether it's the data flows or it's interoperable security frameworks, is another thing. So for opening remarks, I would just highlight those two things that I think would be helpful in the taxonomy that you're working here to work in on the next iteration. But apart from that, I'll stop. Look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. And we'll miss that extra half hour that we would use. But appreciate the opening remarks, jurisdiction, etc. We have one more to go.
We'll have almost no time left for comments. We will have almost no time left for comments.
Okay. Now just going to
the next one.
speak a bit
Arthur,
faster.
please.
I'm going to speak a bit faster then. Now, from the Alliance for Internet of Things Innovation, it's an initiative by the European Commission. It started 2 years ago, so they started it. They grouped together stakeholders, and now it's actually an association. So that's, I think, good to know that is actually happening. And what we're doing there on security, privacy, data management, data protection level is not inventing or making new standards. There are 360 standards already on the market, as I mentioned earlier today, and 110 in the making. And we believe that is not a sustainable way of trying to get there. IoT is about hyperconnectivity. It's about connecting people. It's about connecting society with things, with sensors, with computing power, and with algorithms. Therefore, we also think that we need to hyperconnect those standards. So what we have done is basically look at a couple of items that I think are very important for everybody to focus on. One, of course, is the application, including the technical stack. So what is actually involved here when we're building a certain IoT device, whether it's a wearable for consumer or we're trying to smarten up the industry with industry IoT or with an OT, even an operational technology that we add something on that is linked to internet if you would like to do that. That's one. Second, so we stack it basically. With that already have several baskets. So just an example, communications and networks is a layer. The hardware devices is a layer. Applications, platforms is a layer. And services is a layer. Of course, you can make many other different, but we try to keep it only to 4. Then we add 3 other items with 3 dimensions. One is data, because data is relevant all over the place. It's not a layer. Secondly is the human side. The human is also relevant in the factory, whether it's the engineer trying to get the code right, the algorithms, or the one that try to make the sensor correct. And the third one is authentication, so identity and authentication. Who is allowed to do what when? So now we have 4 layers, 3 dimensions. And what we've done, we've read everything that there is on the market, including all the standards and also I think I saw a couple of best practice guidelines that the World Economic Forum read as well, like GSMA and IoT Security Forum. And we basically extracted the principles, because we're in principle-based market. I'm not going to explain that again. Happy to do it, of course. Principle-based, and extrapolate these, drop them in baskets. With that, you have molecules, and we identified 464 unique so far, 464 unique principles on security and privacy. So this is now a set of brain cells that you can use depending on your context, depending on the stakeholders that are involved, depending on the data whether it's personal, non-personal, or both. And that's with that you get a model, and that's what we are working on. Try to avoid standards, but try to connect them and see what best practices we can get out of it. So that's called a meta framework or model. We don't have a name for it yet, but that is what we're working on. So that's for my opening statement. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Avri. Having heard all this, I know there's very little time left, but I know you'll make the best use of it.
Extremely little time. Sometimes they actually let me be a timekeeper, and then they'd have more time. One of the things I wanted to ask before we started, and then I really wanted to give the time to you all to make comments, but hopefully short ones, is how many of you have actually read through the paper that we intend to finish next year? Could I just see a quick raising of hands just to know how prevalent that has been? Okay, all the panelists, that's really good. Not many of you. So I'd like to say before we get much further is please do, because we've got one more year where we're really trying to get this paper finished. It's got some good stuff in it, but it really needs some more work. Now, who would like to make a first comment? If you can keep it to a minute, that would be good, because then we can get a couple in. Anybody? No one has a comment? Really? I scared them all away? No, that can't be. I saw from the earlier point that somebody had comments. Okay. I'll ask. Oh, we have one. Okay, great. Please. Thanks. Otherwise, I would have asked a question. No, we haven't opened the mine's off. Yeah.
Yeah, this microphone works. Yeah. There's another one. My name is Paul Timmers. I had actually 2 questions. And I don't know whether you actually addressed that in the paper, because I must admit I didn't read it in full. One is that a lot of what is around best practice may also point in the direction of having questions phrased and best practice formulated around ethics. And is that part of what you do? And that also points to kind of a second question, which is the whole governance that you have. Whatever people are saying around principle-based legislation, whatever they are saying around governance, whatever you say about security and privacy protocols, there is a dimension to it of governance. And so do you, within the Dynamic Coalition, also intend to, let's say, perhaps start gathering best practice around governance, and then that may lead to better framing of how you would do governance?
Thank you. There is definitely a discussion of ethics in the paper. The governance part is kind of what's sort of forming on this panel, and the paper is not as strong in, I would say. But perhaps others would like to add. I don't know, Martin, whether you want to take a crack at that, or any of you who have all read the paper could.
Well, for sure on governance, the thing is, what we can do here together, and what we've been blessed and privileged to from having input from many people over the years, is that this paper is getting to get some level of maturity, as people around the table and in the room have seen if they've read it. In the end, however good this document is, it will only work if you take it out there and make it work. It's an open process, and that is the emphasis of the governance. It's driven by volunteer experience and by partners who come to this table that thinks it matters, and they take it forward in their own networks. So I think that is what we can do at this moment, Paul.
Okay,
Can I
please.
just add a quick?
Okay, please.
I'll just mention that the center in San Francisco that we opened, we actually have created an IoT vertical. I said to Martin that could be a place where we can continue the discussions. We have two colleagues from San Francisco, actually, Edan and Ann Toth and Edan Katz. Edan actually drafted the protocols on IoT, so if you don't like them, talk to him. If you like them, talk to me or Ann. And actually, we want more comments, but we're offering that to the DC to see how we can leverage the platform in San Francisco to continue some of the discussions.
Yes. No. That did look to me like it sort of may have filled some of the blanks I saw in the paper. We had a comment.
How do you turn this thing on? Thank you. Brian Cute from Public Interest Registry. I just want to say that the remarks from Marco on the one hand and Eric really resonated with me in that I heard you both, I guess on the one hand, Marco, kind of challenging from you and your colleagues' perspective in the first instance, is this Internet of Things truly something distinct and different and definable? And Eric, the industrial IoT versus the individual, I think there's a risk that if there isn't real clarity about definition of what the Internet of Things is or is not, then a lot of this great work will go to naught. And I would encourage everyone to put some greater focus on that part. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please. And there is a microphone on in the back that could get shut off. Thank you.
Well,
So although I agree with you on definition, the IERC here in Europe has a very ambitious definition on IoT, but I think we are going the wrong way, or we're making the same mistakes we've made a decade ago, two decades ago than before, in focusing too much on trying to pinpoint it. Because we're already talking about robotics, we're talking about AI, we're talking about deep learning, and many other things. I don't want to bring them to the IT discussion per se, but just I want to show that there is no distinction between where something starts and stops. Therefore, I think we need to be quite agile in using it and need to have a contextualized approach. Also with the paper, trying to indeed have a contextualized approach as well, because otherwise this is everything. This is the Internet of everything, everybody. So therefore, I would like to avoid that we spend years on trying to define the IoT definition perfectly.
just a quick response. I think what Brian's highlighting, though, I'd say some categorization is necessary to help with policymakers, because certainly I've spent a lot of time having to even start by just explaining how, a connected device is not this. Right, so a lot of the default regulations in place with something that is connected are going to start by thinking about your phone. And so there may be a lot of policies that by default end up attaching that have nothing to do with IoT. So I think it is important in terms of figuring out of whether it's the safety or economic or social policies that you have in mind, that there are different considerations from this, from a connected device, from an industrial device.
Thank you. In our last 4 minutes, I had Marco, then I had Paul with a question, and then I had Sebastian, and that's, if you guys go quickly, we'll get it all in 4 minutes.
Okay, agree with the previous speakers. I think you have to be careful also the more bigger the definition, the more encompassing the definition, the more problems you will import under that definition, the harder it will become to solve. And that's I think also with Eric's comment, the moment you start treating a car as a phone, you also import all the regulatory aspects of that. That's a prime example there. So be careful what you wish for, and I would rather take a more siloed approach here, because that will mean that the problems are manageable.
Hi, Paul Wilson from APNIC. I think the question of definition would be easier if we could all just agree that the Internet of Things doesn't exist. That we actually just have the Internet, and we've got things that have been being connected to the Internet, admittedly at greater pace than before, but we've been doing this for a long, long time. Jeff Houston from APNIC wrote one of his provocative articles recently about the Internet of Stupid Things, and he cited quite a few cases of things that were misbehaving on the Internet. And the ironic thing is that those things were things like home routers. They weren't refrigerators and new devices. They were home routers. They were devices that are traditionally Internet devices manufactured by internet companies who did a very bad job and caused various problems. Now, I think back to one of the strongest impediments to the growth of the internet in Australia back in the late 1980s was the fact that you were not allowed to connect anything to the phone system unless it was actually approved. And getting that approval cost someone, an importer, for instance, $20,000 to connect something to the phone system. The difference with the internet is that for very many years we've had the need for no such thing. We don't need approvals to connect software or devices to the internet. And the internet is generally robust enough to allow that, and that's a very, very good thing. And I just wonder if all of this focus on defining what these devices must be and how they must behave and how they must be designed is actually leading us into the wrong place, which is to rely on those so-called protections instead of relying on the robustness of the internet to actually continue to do the same old job that it's been doing for a long time, coping pretty well with growth, needs to do a lot more of that in future. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Although I had heard people talking about insurability and things like that and not necessarily attachability. Sebastian, and we're down to like 1 minute, and then I want to give it to you, Martin, to say whatever it is you want to say at the end.
Just a quick comment. Yeah, I've seen a survey. We've seen a survey where people responded that smartphones were IoT devices by 97%. For us, I mean, IoTs are things that are not computers and have minimal human intervention. That basically, roughly, is the definition we use. I just contribute with our definition to add something to the table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to. Oh, we have a remote comment? No. And I'm going to turn it over to Martin. But the last thing I want to say is go to the paper. It's still there for review. Each paragraph has a section for you guys to comment. Really, it's a great time to do it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Avery. It's an unthankful task to be moderator for when the time slips away. But I thank you very much for getting all this out of this little time. Very much appreciated. Also want to thank all the panelists for what they brought in. And again, there's much more behind this. This was only 1 hour of your time on a subject that at the global level means a lot. Go to the program page, and there you can click down to more information. Sign up for the DC IoT mailing list, become part of it. And we're really looking for, next to World Economic Forum, and next to what is happening in Europe, next to what's happening at RIPE NCC, at ISOC, if you're willing to invest, to help, to progress, where we need to put the finger, where we need to take action, how to develop this taxonomy that makes us aware of what security is necessary where, what safety is necessary where is privacy and data really need to get drilled down to. Please come back to us as well. We're very open to participate. As I said, it's a club of committed enthusiasts that think that this is really important, something needs to be done, which means you're welcome. You won't get paid, but you get a lot of satisfaction of working even closer with us than you've done today. So thank you all very much for coming, and looking forward to see you around.
Yo.
Testing, testing. IGF, right?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Prendergast, and as I mentioned before, this is Workshop 99. Is there a place for civility in our digital future? Just wanted to go over a few sort of administrative matters for you. If you haven't been in one of these style rooms before, the acoustics can be a little difficult. The earpieces will transmit the audio. Just tune into channel 1 for English. There is no translation, unfortunately. And then when you do speak in fair warning, we will be asking you to speak at some point. Just get close to the microphone. You sort of have to hunch over at those tables. Also, if you do have problems hearing, feel free to move on up. I mean, it's a pretty big room and we're a pretty small group, so get as close as you feel comfortable. And as I mentioned, it is a bit of a heads up, fair warning. This will be an interactive session. This will not be 4 people talking at you for the next 90 minutes. We want to definitely get the audience engaged. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from you if you disagree with what people are saying. That is the whole point of this exercise. It's not for us just to walk through PowerPoints and throw information at you. We really want to dig into these issues and get into discussions. Today's session is going to have sort of 3 parts. The first will be some brief presentations from our panelists and our facilitators that give some background on some research that I think will set the stage for our discussion around digital civility. Then comes the sort of interactive session that I talked about. We're going to throw a couple of questions to you, but when we do that, we're going to do it one at a time, and we're going to ask you to discuss one question at a time with your neighbor. So now's the time to get to know the person next to you or across from you. So that's who you're going to be working with for a couple of minutes. And then we're going to bring it back to the larger group and sort of get a sense of what people talked about and engage in a discussion. So we'll do that for 2 questions, and then finally, we're going to talk about sort of 3 programs that are underway that do seek to address some of the challenges and aspects of digital civility online. So with that, we'll get into the beginning of the program, sort of the setup. We've got 4 panelists with us today. We have Clara Summerin from UNICEF. She specializes in child protection issues at UNICEF, based in New York City. We have Jacqueline Boucher, who's the Chief Online Safety Officer at Microsoft. We have Tommaso Bertolotti. He's a bit of a Renaissance man. He's a philosopher. No joke. He's a philosopher. He's a philosophical consultant. That's a new title I'd never heard before, but you'll hear more from him and he'll explain about it. And then finally, we have Nicholas Carlisle, who's the founder and CEO of No Bully. So to get us sort of kick this program off, I think one of the things we talked about, and I think it's important because there may not be one answer to this, is I'm going to ask each of our panelists to sort of give the audience and give you a sense of what they mean by digital civility, so that we can help orient the discussion so we're all sort of headed at least this direction instead of going that direction. So with that, Clara, you want to take us away?
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm very pleased to be here today, and great to see this great audience here. So digital civility, yes, I think when it comes to children, I think it's about empowering children to use the internet and also mobile phones in a respectful way, ensuring that they're not harming other children, but also at the same time that they're not harmed themselves. So in short, that's for me digital civility.
Jacqueline?
Thanks, Jim. We've been working with the concept of digital civility for a couple of years now at Microsoft, and we would define it as basically interacting with respect and compassion and leading with empathy online and making sure that all online interactions are respectful and compassionate and empathetic amongst all individuals of all technical abilities and all ages.
Thanks. Tommaso?
So thank you. Well, when I think of digital civility, I think of the origin of the word, and the word origin of civility is civitas, which means the city. And it's the same etymology as politeness, whose origin is the polis, the Greek city. So digital civility is being able to live together, being compassionate together, and recognize each other and trust each other as we would do in a regular, in a city, in a polis, a city that is an organic tissue of people living together and thriving together.
And finally, Nicholas.
So I come at this question through the lens of a problem, which is bullying. And through that lens, I've seen the lack of certain things. And I think the 2 things that are most strikingly lacking in bullying and hate as they are online are, first off, bullying is about leaving people out, and I believe that the foundation really of civility is inclusivity. And secondly, bullying is a profound lack of compassion for the other person. So the second strong part of civility, from my perspective, is compassion. So compassion and inclusivity, I think, is central to digital civility.
Great, thank you. So Clara, do you want to sort of talk about some of the research that you've been doing through UNICEF that's approaching this issue?
Yes, thank you. So you can see on the screen here the different research that UNICEF has been undertaking over the past 10 years when it comes to empowering children online, to understand how they use ICTs online, and what are the harms and what are the risks that children face online. And just last week we did launch our new flagship report, The State of the World Children 2017, which focuses on children in a digital world. And it looks at how technology has really changed children's life. It identifies dangers and explores what the future holds for children when it comes to the opportunities. And as we all know, that 1 in 3 internet users today are children. So with this, it is important to look at these issues when it comes to children. We also know that children at younger ages are accessing ICTs, and more we know that they're accessing it through mobile phones. And with this, it becomes more private, personal, and perhaps less supervised access than ever before. So with this, we know really that ICTs are changing childhood. And while we know it provides so many good opportunities in terms of learning, education, economic opportunities, but also to be able to stay connected with families and friends, we also know that it comes risks and harm. And I think some of these risks and harm are very connected with digital civility, as Nicholas was saying in the case of cyberbullying. And so the issues that we look at through this research are the risk and harm. So for example, cyberbullying, but also online sexual abuse and exploitation, online grooming, and also online sexual harassment. And through the research, we have asked children what they think about the internet. So we've asked 18 years old about their experiences of using the internet for the first time, and we've also done through our Voices of Youth, we've collected, and through our U report, we collected children's opinions. And what we can see from this research is that 23% of the children said that they disliked violence, and that was the thing that most upset them about the internet. And we can see that girls are slightly a little bit more upset by the violence they experience online, 27% versus 20% of the boys. And 33% of the children said they disliked unwanted sexual content. And that was what they really most disliked about the internet. And here it was actually 33% of the girls disliked this and 32% of the boys. So here you don't really see a gender difference. We also see that 65% of the girls and 40% of the boys strongly agree that they would be worried if they received sexual comments or requests over the internet. And 8 out of 10 believe young people are in danger of sexual abuse or being taken advantage online. So I think this really shows that young people are quite concerned about this. And we can see that there are some regional differences where, for example, young people in low and middle income countries are more upset as compared to young people in high income countries. So for example, in low and middle income countries, 42% of the children said that they were upset about things online versus only 16% in high income countries. And it's interesting to see that 5 out of 10 children actually think that friends participate in risky behavior online. And 6 out of 10 children do think that it's very important to meet with new people online. But only 36% of those children think that they can tell people are lying about who they are online. So this is quite worrying when we have 6 out of 10 young children thinking it's important to know new people, but only 36% think that they can tell who people are online. And finally, the research shows that while, in some culture, this can depend on culture context. In some contexts, children do tend to turn to the parents and teachers, but in most contexts, we know that adolescents actually turn to their friends about if they're upset online. But only less than half, 44%, strongly agree that they know how to help a friend facing online risk. And I think this also points to that children needs help in terms of dealing with online risk, and some of these risks are related to digital civility, such as cyberbullying. So this is some of the research that UNICEF has been looking at in recent years.
Great, thanks, Clara. Jacqueline, you want to talk us through a little bit about what Microsoft's been up to?
Sure. So I'd like to share with you some results of a specific research that we did that we released in conjunction with International Safer Internet Day this past February. And it was specifically geared toward digital civility. The study was called Civility, Safety, and Online Interactions. So this data, they were fielded in June of 2016, and I'll give you the results at a very high level. And know that we have repeated this research, and we will be releasing it in 23 countries next International Safer Internet Day on February the 6th of 2018. So this particular study focuses on teens and adults, teens ages 13 to 17, adults ages 18 to 74 in 14 different countries. And we asked them about their lifetime exposure to 17 different online risks. We then took those 17 risks and we grouped them into 4 specific categories. So we're talking about behavioral risks, sexual risks, reputational risks, and what we call personal and intrusive risks. So just to give you again some of the highlights, this came as a little bit of a surprise to us, but for the most part, people said that they find the internet to be a rather civil place, but they were concerned about some future risks, particularly with respect to unwanted contact, harassment, and damage to both their personal and their professional reputations. So of the more than 7,000 people that we spoke with, 65%, so almost 2/3, said that they reported being a victim of at least one form of online risk or one form of online abuse. And the most overwhelming chief concern and chief risk that they were exposed to.
A positive environment. So would you do that? Would you do the same online? Or maybe sometimes you haven't done the same online? Can I end up on a provocative note? Well, no, it's not mean, but sometimes I think that since this discourse on online civility, at least in certain settings, it's becoming something more and more, we're more and more aware of, I think that sometimes the tendency could be inverted. Now, we behave online in ways and then we ask ourselves, would that be okay in real life? Would I be polite in real life? Would I be civil in real life? And I always have the thought or the hope that we might get to something opposite, like internet becoming a sandbox of civility. You do something in real life and say, would that be okay online? Would I have behaved the same online, or would I have come across as a bully online? And just inverse the model and the frame. Thank you.
Thanks, Tommaso. Nicholas, you want to wrap this section up?
Thank you. That was, I loved your provocative question there. That's an inspiring goal for us to be working towards. There's a writer that I love called Neil Gaiman. Some of you may know him from his science fiction writing. And he writes very fascinatingly about stories. And here is what he has to say. Stories teach us how the world is put together and the rules of living in the world. Let me repeat that. Stories teach us how the world is put together and the rules of living in the world. We are all governed by stories, whether we are aware of them or not. And we're all governed by stories of online and what it means to be online, and stories about what the internet is. And what I wanted to do with you today was to talk partly about the reality of online bullying for youth, but also about the stories that we tell about it. And they're very different. So I run a nonprofit. We're a US-based called No Bully, and our mission is to eradicate bullying worldwide. And over the last decade, we've had increasing requests from people saying, give us help around online bullying. And if you look at the stats of online bullying, what we see about it, and we know from the great reports that UNICEF has done and the World Health Organization has done, roughly 1/3 of adolescents around the world are the target of bullying. It's a pretty high number. 1/3 of adolescents around the world are the target of bullying. Roughly half of those experience that bullying in the form of online bullying. There's a lot of overlap. So the kids who are bullied online often are, that starts offline, or it starts online and then moves offline. There's a lot of fluidity between online and offline. So the numbers are significant, and the effects can range, just like child abuse can, from seemingly short-lived to devastating the lives of children as they start to have suicidal thoughts and the view that life is not worth living. So cyberbullying is a huge problem and a significant problem. On the back of that are the stories that we tell about the internet. I'm thinking of a survey that AT&T did last year in the United States, and what they found was, it replicates a lot of what you're finding at Microsoft too, is that 41% of the teens that they interviewed said that they considered the internet was a mean place. This question of trust is something that I've heard again and again in all the sessions I've been to today. Trust is a reality, but it also comes from a story that we tell ourselves about what is likely to happen and whether this place, this online place, is safe. I'm really concerned about the youth that are the target of cyberbullying. I'm also really concerned about what's happening to the internet and the culture that is emerging in the internet. And it starts to go into a downward spiral. Because what we know is that as I trust less, I'm less willing to be cooperative with you. I start to get hypervigilant. I start to watch for, are you attacking me? Is your intention good, or is it, as I surmise from my story, is it actually hostile? Are you out to get me? Is there even a place for me online? That all starts to be given genesis by the stories that we tell. So what we see from the adults that you've seen in your surveys and from kids is that they're starting to go down two routes. One route is you start to withdraw from online contact. And that's really concerning, because the original vision, if you look to the framers of the internet, was that this was an inclusive place. Everyone gets to belong. So yes, I can pull back, and my friends can pull back, and our children and youth around the world can start to pull back, but we no longer then have an inclusive internet. Or I can start to feel that I'm under attack in the internet and get very hypervigilant. And in my own hypervigilance, I start to contribute to this downward spiral of, I'm perceiving you as aggressive to me, so I'm going to fight back against you. And then we get the verbal wars that we see, the spats that we see happening across the internet. Over time, there have been some wonderful shared spaces. There have been the commons and the grazing lands across the world that people have used for their sustenance. In recent years, we've started to talk about the tragedy of the commons, these shared spaces that are getting degraded and are no longer sustaining them because people are exploiting them. And when we talk today about digital civility, my perception of the internet is that it's at risk of becoming that tragedy of the commons. Unless we start to insist on digital civility, unless we start to teach people and inspire them to be that way online, we're at risk of damaging this shared space. And that is why I believe that digital civility is so important.
Great, thanks everybody. So we're going to move into, as I warned you, the interactive part of this. You know, we've done some of these panels together in the past, and we don't like as much as anybody seeing 8 people up there talking to you for 90 minutes. So that's why we do this. What we want you to do is, you know, as I mentioned, we want you to talk to your neighbor about one question for about 2 minutes. And then when you're done with that, we're going to open it up, or we're going to have a discussion. We want to hear what you talked about, some reactions from up here, but, you know, let's get a discussion going back and forth, table